Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, Innistrad Crimson Vow spoiler season has come to an end, and during spoiler season, well, a lot of the cards that get a lot of the attention are, those exciting commanders, and then also, those bomb mythics and the rares, They kind of eat up all that attention, and you know what? I'm here to remind you that there are plenty of fantastic commons and uncommons, those unheralded heroes that I am urging you, please do not sleep on these Crimson Vow cards. I mean, those rares and mythics might be really exciting, but those day-to-day cards, those commons and uncommons that, well, might not be as flashy, but are still incredibly effective in the right decks and incredibly effective in a lot of decks out there, so yeah. So let's go through my picks for those commons and uncommons that you should not be sleeping on. Now, I'm pretty sure last time I did these in Wooburg order, so for whatever reason, I'm doing this in reverse Wooburg order, because why not? So, for that reason, we're starting off with the green cards that you should not be sleeping on, like Reclusive Taxidermist, which is kind of a interesting name. Regardless, Reclusive Taxidermist is a 1/2 human druid that costs 1 and a green. She gets +3/+2 as long as there are 4 more creature cards in your graveyard, and she can tap to add 1 mana of any color. Now, when it comes to decks that actually want to run mana dorks, this one has potential. I mean, first off, being able to tap for 1 mana of any color is huge. Perfect mana fixing and, ramp. On top of that, this can just be, a 2 mana 4/4 at a certain point. So again, if you've got a deck that's going to be getting creatures in your graveyard, maybe again that's a self-mill deck or something like that, or you just have a ton of creatures and, as they die, this can actually become, quite a heavy hitter that you can get down early. Okay, I mean, I say heavy hitter, it's a 4/4, but again, it's a 4/4 for just 2 mana. That can also just tap for 1 mana of any color, so yeah, there are definitely some decks out there that might want to be considering this one. Next up, though, a very different card, though one that actually could help out that taxidermist, is Crawling Infestation. It's an enchantment for 2 and a green, and says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill 2 cards. And then whenever 1 or more creature cards are put in your graveyard from anywhere during your turn, you create a 1/1 green insect creature token. This ability only triggers once each turn. So this is pretty much exactly Crawling Sensation, which sees play in a good amount of decks, especially self-mill decks out there. Obviously, there are some differences with this being just limited to your turn, and that one counting lands and not creatures, but yeah, okay, there's differences, but they're similar. So yeah, for a deck that's going to be running a lot of creatures and is looking to mill itself, well, you can get some extra value out of milling yourself with this. And speaking of extra value, if you have a human tribal deck, or if you've got a shapeshifter or changeling tribal deck, or a lord's tribal deck, Laid to Rest is definitely one that you might want to consider. It's an enchantment for 3 and a green that says whenever a human you control dies, draw a card. On top of that, whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, you gain 2 life. So yeah, from our previous set, Innistrad Midnight Hunt, I think there was something like, 3 human tribal commanders just in that set? So yeah, this card can definitely have place in those decks, especially for human tribal commanders that also up and deal +1/+1 counters. So yeah, there's some good synergy there as well. I mean, who doesn't want to draw a bunch of cards? If there happens to be a board wipe and your creatures die, you're still getting a lot of value out of that. And on top of that, you can gain a lot of life as well to, pad that life total if you've got a lot of +1/+1 counters on your creatures. Regardless though, now it's time to move away from green. And on to red with 2 cards that I want to highlight with Reckless Impulse and Into the Night. Reckless Impulse is a sorcery for 1 in a red, and it says exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So obviously, it's actually in the name of the card. This is an impulse draw card. Again, you get temporary access to cards off the top of your library. That being said, it is a good amount of time in that, it is until the end of your next turn. So you've got some time to either cast it on the current turn when you're casting this, because again, this is a sorcery, or on the next turn. And again, It also says play those cards so you can utilize lands that you might hit from this. And yeah, a card that can essentially give you access to 2 cards. Again, it isn't, it's temporary card advantage, but it's still card advantage. 2 cards for 2 mana is a really good deal. I think the one thing that you might really want to consider on this card, though, is again that it is sorcery speed, so again, you're not really going to be able to hold mana up for other things if you're utilizing mana on this, as well as other things that you're casting in that turn. And speaking of sorcery speed, another card that unfortunately is at sorcery speed, but you also might want to consider for the right deck, is Into the Night. It costs 3 and a red and says it becomes night, so cool. Discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards plus 1. So obviously, if you've got a werewolf tribal deck that cares about, daybound and nightbound, cool, you can switch it to night. Awesome. Why not? But I guess for the majority of decks that might want to utilize this is more so going to be like a wheel effect, because again, discarding any number of cards then drawing that many cards plus 1, again, that's just straight up just kind of switching out your hand for the exact amount of cards, because again, you're casting this, so you're losing out on that card and you're drawing plus 1. If you've got a deck that actually wants to wheel, or, has, cares about its graveyard, or, wants to draw a bunch of cards, it's definitely a card that you might want to consider. Now let's move on to 2 very different cards that I want to highlight with Kessig Flamebreather and Lamholt Raconteur. Kessig Flamebreather is a 1/3 human shaman for 1 and a red that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Kessig Flamebreather deals 1 damage to each opponent. So keep in mind this counts any non-creature spell that you're casting. Again, not just instants and sorceries. Typically we see instant and sorcery on these type of cards, but this can count, planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments. So yeah, even if you're displaying a mana rock, which actually it's kind of like a soul ring on the card. I'm sure that wasn't intentional. Maybe it was, but basically, even if you cast your soul ring, you ping all of your opponents, and yeah, what red decks don't want to ping opponents? Okay, there are plenty out there, but still. And speaking of pinging opponents, of course, you can do that with Lamholt Raconteur as well, a 2/4 human werewolf for 3 and a red that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Lamholt Raconteur deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is just literally the exact same level of effectiveness, but for twice the amount of mana. But of course, that's why Daybound is also on this card. When it becomes night, this turns into Lamholt Ravager, a 4/4 werewolf that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Lamholt Ravager deals 2 damage to each opponent. So basically a gutter snipe, but again, instead of just counting instants and sorceries, this counts all non-creature spells. So have fun dishing out a ton of damage to all of your opponents. Again, even just playing, that mana rock like a soul ring, you're pinging each opponent for 2, and if you've got all 3 opponents still left, that's 6 damage for just 1 spell, so have fun. But now it's time to move away from these red cards into our next color. So we're moving on to black with cards like Persistent Specimen, Undying Malice, and Pointed Discussion. Persistent Specimen is a very cool card, a 1/1 skeleton for a black that has pay 2 and a black, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this skeleton is most definitely reminiscent of Reassembling Skeleton. And that card sees a good amount of play in Commander, being a fantastic card for aristocrat-style strategies that are looking to get creatures out, then sacrifice them. And yeah, with that one, you can just keep getting it back out, and again, and again, and again, and you can definitely do that with this too. That being said, there obviously is a mana difference between this card and that one. That one costs 1 and a black, and its ability costs 1 and a black. So although you are saving mana on the upfront, where you just get this creature out for just 1 mana, you do have to pay more mana to actually get this one back out into play from your graveyard. So overall, I think that Reassembling Skeleton is probably more impactful because you're probably going to pay that mana cost more often from your graveyard. But still, this one can definitely have a place in those types of decks as well, being able to get out of your graveyard for a relatively cheap cost. And speaking of relatively cheap, let's also talk about Undying Malice, an instant for a black that says, until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped on its owner's control, they +1 counter on it. And actually, with this spoiler, I had to double check just to make sure that it actually wasn't a reprint because, well, this exact text I found was very familiar, and I went back to check, and yeah, Feign Death from Dungeons & Dragons Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, I think is literally just the exact same card. Does the 100% the exact same mana cost. It's an instant as well, same text. So yeah, not a reprint, just kind of a duplicate card. Regardless, yeah, I'm not going to complain about having more cards that do the same effect when they can be really effective in certain decks. So yeah, an aristocrat-style strategy, or one that you actually just want to protect your commander and get it back out into play, or one that you want to abuse ETBs and LTBs, this kind of a card can definitely help you out. Next up though, a very different card is Pointed Discussion, a sorcery for 2 and a black that says you draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, then create a blood token. And again, blood tokens are artifacts that have pay 1, tap, discard a card, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. So obviously this is kind of one of those read the bones type cards where it's like, hey, you're drawing 2 cards, losing 2 life or 3 mana at sorcery speed, and you get 1 additional benefit. And the benefit for this one again is that you get a blood token, which isn't card advantage, but it is card selection, and it can actually really help you out in a lot of situations. So when you need to utilize that to get rid of a dead card in your hand for another card, or again, if you've got a reanimation style deck or a graveyard centric deck where you want to get certain things in your graveyard, you can utilize that to help you out. Moving on, next up though, a card that, well, is for a very specific type of deck. We've got Archghoul of Thraben. It's a 3/2 zombie cleric for 2 and a black that says whenever it or another zombie you control dies, look at the top card of your library. If it's a zombie card, you may reveal it and put it in your hand. If you don't put the card in your hand, you may put it in your graveyard. So this can actually just be a ton of card advantage or, graveyard filling for a zombie deck. Whenever any of your zombies die, and keep in mind, this does not specify non-token, so when any zombie dies that you control, including your token zombies, you're getting to look at the top card of your library and determining, hey, first off, is this a zombie? Cool, just go straight into my hand, that's great. Or you know what, if it's a card that you might want in your graveyard on top, just put it in your graveyard. So it's kind of like zombie card advantage / surveil in a way. So yeah, I can definitely see a lot of zombie decks out there looking at this card and being like, add to cart. Thank you. But now it's time to move on to our next color. And again, since we're going in reverse WUBRG order, of course, that would be blue. So let's talk about cards like Lantern Bearer, Wash Away, and Alchemist Retrieval. Lantern Bearer is a 1/1 spirit with flying for a blue, and yeah, I've actually mentioned this on a few episodes, but it seems like we're getting just more and more value out of our 1/1 flyers. We're just getting extra things kind of added on, and yeah, actually, I really like this card. It also has Disturb for 2 and a blue. So you can get this flyer down early, then when it dies, you can still get value out of it from your graveyard by paying that 2 and a blue. And yeah, then you get Lantern's Lift, which is an aura that can enchant creature, giving enchanted creature +1/+1 and flying. There are plenty of decks out there that like to utilize small evasive creatures that are cheap, whether that's, Edrix by Master of Trest, or, a flyers deck. Yeah, there are decks out there that just want, small flyers that just want to get through anyways. And this one's like, hey, not only do you get that, but as soon as this one dies, you still can utilize this card for something else to help out another creature. Regardless, next up is Wash Away, and I'll just quickly go through this one because I actually did a full episode on this card because I think it's pretty fantastic. It's instant for a blue that has Cleave for 1 blue. It says counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. So again, that part in brackets, if you cast it for its cleave cost, is gone, so that would just be counter target spell. So this is an incredibly flexible card that I actually was sleeping on at first, until, it was realized that basically, hey, if you just want to counter someone's commander because the commander is not cast from the hand, this is a 1 mana counter spell for that. So yeah, that can be incredibly impactful. Regardless, if you want to hear more about my opinion on this card, make sure you check out my episode on it. Anyways, next up, Alchemist Retrieval, another 1 mana instant. It's got Cleave for 1 and a blue, and it says return target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. And again, if you cast for the Cleave cost, you're taking off that you control, so it says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This actually might be one of my favorite, if not my favorite bounce spell, for that 2 mana kind of bounce spell, like those Into the Royal kind of cards. Because, yeah, if you need to bounce just basically anything for 2 mana, you can. And if you need to bounce, one of your own things just to save it, you get a discount on that, essentially just paying 1 mana. So, yeah, there are definitely some decks that I can think of that are going to want to utilize a card like this. Next up, though, let's talk about Thirst for Discovery, an instant for 2 and a blue that says draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land card. So obviously this card is a callback to Thirst for Knowledge, which sees a good amount of play, and yeah, that one's an instant that says draw 3 cards and discard 2 unless you discard an artifact card. And it's kind of like that combined with Compulsive Research, which actually is a sorcery though, that basically lets you do this exact same thing, but you can discard any land card. So essentially to bump it up at instant speed, it has to be a basic land, but yeah, if you've got a ton of basic lands in your deck, maybe you run budget decks like mine, and basic lands are fantastic, so yeah, then you can utilize this card to be able to do that at instant speed, which is huge. So yeah, I can see this card seeing a decent amount of play for decks out there that utilize basic lands. But now it's time to move away from blue into our final mono color, which of course is white, and unfortunately there's actually only one card that I do want to highlight in white in commons and uncommons. Sorry, mono white. Anyways, that's Radiant Grace. It's an aura for a white that says enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has vigilance. On top of that, when enchanted creature dies, return Radiant Grace to the battlefield, transformed under your control attached to target opponent. And then on the backside, we've got Radiant Restraints, an aura curse that says enchant player, creatures enchanted player controls enter the battlefield tapped. So your typical creature auras really don't see a lot of play in Commander because, well, if the creature on it dies, you just lose, the value that you put onto it with the aura. But essentially, with this aura, if that creature does die, you get this back attached to an opponent, and you get to hamper that opponent by making their creatures come into play tapped. So if you've got a deck deck built around auras or enchantments or curses, this is definitely a card that you might want to consider. It can benefit one of your creatures to start, and then when that creature dies, you can really hamper an opponent and slow them down, and maybe even make them a good target for players to swing at since their creatures are coming into play tapped. Regardless, now that we're done with the mono colors, let's move on to multicolor. And two cards that I want to highlight in multicolor are Wandering Mind and Ancient Lumberknot. Wandering Mind is a 2/1 horrific creature with flying that costs 1 blue-red. Yeah, that art is, I'm trying not to stare at it too long. Anyways, it says, when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, put it in your hand, and put the rest of them on your library in a random order. So this card actually lets you dig pretty far, and yeah, for a deck that's going to be running a lot of non-creature spells, you're going to be able to get something juicy with this a lot of the time. And of course, if you've got a deck that, maybe is built around blinking or, getting additional copies of a creature, you can really use and abuse that ETB to get a lot of value out of this. And then Ancient Lumberknot is going to be used for a very different purpose, a 1/4 tree folk that costs 2 black-green. It says, each creature you control toughness greater than its power, assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Now, please correct me below in the comments if I am wrong in this, but I don't believe that this exact kind of wording has ever been used on a card. We have seen in the past, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, your creatures assign combat damage based on their toughness and not their power, but this one's like, hey, you get the best of both worlds. If you ever have a creature that, has a higher toughness and power, you are getting that additional, essentially, transfer of power toughness. You know what I mean? And yeah, there are decks out there that definitely like to play with, having a lot of toughness and then having effects that let you deal damage based on toughness, so Ancient Lumberknot can definitely find a spot in those types of decks, those Door in the Siege Tower type decks. Regardless, now that we talked about multicolor cards, let's move on to our last category and talk about artifacts. And 2 artifact cards that I really want to highlight are Lantern of the Lost and Wedding Invitation. Lantern of the Lost is an artifact for 1 that has, when it enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard, and by paying 1 and tapping it, you exile it and exile all cards from all graveyards, then you draw a card. So, in a way, it's kind of like a Relic of Progenitus. Now, I'm not saying that it's better, but it's definitely similar in some ways. I mean, when this comes into play, you do get to exile a card of your choice, which is fantastic, and then when you do need to hit that panic button and just, get rid of every graveyard, you can. And of course, when you do that like Relic, you actually get to draw a card, so yeah, graveyard hate as well as card advantage, what's not to like? And speaking of card advantage, how about Wedding Invitation, an artifact for 2 that has, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and pay 2, sacrifice it. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. If it's a vampire, it also gains lifelink until end of turn. There is a special place in my heart for these 2-mana artifacts that just draw you a card when they come into play and do just something else. Because, yeah, one of the first decks I ever built was my Joyra deck, which again, I don't play very often these days because it can, be a bit solitary. And by a bit, I mean a lot. Regardless, there are definitely decks out there like those egg-style decks that are looking for artifacts that draw on ETB. And yeah, maybe ones as well that actually want to make creatures unblockable, so this card can definitely find a spot in those types of decks. Regardless, this is the end of the episode, and of course, I am still urging you, please, 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 whatever you do, do not sleep on these Crimson Vow cards. I know that those commanders out there from this set are exciting, and those rares and mythics get all the attention, but please, 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 do not sleep on these unheralded heroes of the set, the commons and uncommons. So yeah, make sure you keep in mind that there are definitely cards from this set outside of those big and splashy ones that your decks very well might be able to use. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are. And as always, thanks again and have a good one.